Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, guess where you are? Anybody know the name of this session?
Organizational sustainability.
Okay, perfect. You are in the right spot. All right. Let me introduce to you, if I may, both Charles Buck. There's Charles. Do you go by Charles? Charles Buck and Matt Wagner from our sponsor, United Church Funds. And I hope you know how much we appreciate you being here. And I really appreciated your comments. I think it was yesterday morning already. It's kind of flowing by, but thank you very much for that. And with that said, you'll be happy to know I am not hawking pins up here today. However, I will be out in the hallway later, but let's have at it.
Well, thanks so much, Peggy. We heard you last night talk about the pins, and so I went right over and I bought several.
And I so appreciated that.
Yeah, you got it. So we've been introduced, and it's a joy to be here with you on this for this workshop on organizational sustainability. You know what? My thinking is that since we're not terribly large, two things. If you would like to come forward, then we don't have to depend so much on the mic and feel this distance, but it's entirely up to you. I'm not used to sitting up front, that's okay. And the second thing is, you know, since we're not too terribly large, if you don't mind, shall we just go around and just introduce ourselves and say who we are, where we're from? Is that okay with you? If you don't want to come up front, will you at least do that?
Negotiating.
Okay, so I know it won't be on the camera, but we'll do the best we can for the folks who watch this later. I'm going to start with you, Patrick. Why don't we just kind of go around the room here?
Hello, everybody. Patrick Dugan, Executive Director, Church Building and Loan Fund, and glad to be one of the financial ministries that work with UCF.
Nice.
Hi, everybody. Susan Mitchell. I'm the Associate Director, Strategic Initiatives for Church Building and Loan Fund. Good to be in the house and see real people.
It is.
Hi, I'm Diane King from Retirement Housing Foundation. I'm a corporate compliance, ethics, and privacy officer.
My name is Andrea Alsemeyer. I'm a chaplain at Emmaus Homes in St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Mike Brennan. I'm from Every Child's Hope in St. Louis, Missouri, and Kansas City. We do child welfare, foster care, that kind of program.
Hello, I'm Alina Shelvana. I'm the Chief of Staff for Embrace Living Communities. We do senior affordable housing in Illinois, mostly in Illinois. We have some communities in Missouri and Florida. And I work in the corporate office, which is outside of Chicago. And yes, I am not from the United States. I'm from Romania. This is why I have this strong accent.
It's beautiful.
We didn't notice.
Thank you.
I'm Jonathan Lee. I'm the Director of Church Relations and Operations at the Pension Boards in New York City.
And then Peggy, you introduced yourself, so why don't we go and Don? We're just introducing ourselves, who we are.
I'm Don Hart. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Retirement Housing Foundation. And used to have an affiliation with UCF.
Don is my predecessor.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Darlene Soul, Unleashing Potential in St. Louis, and I'm a board member.
Darlene is a board member of UCF.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But mostly here to learn how to sustain my organization.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good topic right now. I think our body, we're probably not feeling like we can sustain much in the afternoon. We're probably all pretty tired. By the way, on your seats, there's something about UCF. We welcome you to take that. And also something about the financial ministries. There are actually 5 financial ministries in the United Church of Christ, UCF being one, Church Building and Loan Fund being another, Cornerstone Fund, the Insurance Board, and the Pension Boards. And I was explaining to Jonathan Lee of the Pension Boards that when this brochure was made, the Pension Boards opted not to do this because they were doing their own brochure at the time. And so when we do a remake of this one, we probably will get all 5 in there. So. We were told that we want to make this as interactive as possible, and so I want to give you some brain work, or just kind of, thoughts, meditation questions here for us, and we can discuss these at the end. So these are just suggested questions, sort of discussion starters, and we can go wherever the Spirit leads. The first question is, what kinds of sustainability practices do you have in place in your organization or wherever you might be. It could even be your church or, you know, whatever is near and dear to your heart. Does your board or management measure your organization's carbon footprint? And have you set net zero goals? And could be some organizations aren't even sure how you go about measuring. Some organizations don't even know what that means yet. But those are, you know, words, those are phrases that are entering the vocabulary, obviously. Third question, are there, this is not a yes or no, it is a yes/no question, but we don't know what the answer is, and that's why we're asking. Are there government or licensing regulations that are that require some sustainability reporting on your part? And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of those, but we're just curious to see what's happening in your field. And finally, how important do you think sustainability is to your current and future donors? Are people asking you about that? Do you sense demand for that? Is that something that is coming at you externally, in addition to whatever internal pressures there may be to do this? Okay, so questions, again, for later, just for you to think about as we go through this. What we're doing today is to talk about organizational stability in a very general way. It's a vast topic. If you were to just search online, you'll see that there's plenty of stuff out there, plenty of ways of thinking about this. Even sustainability itself is such a broad topic, and it means many things. I mean, I'm on a sustainability task force for the UCC, but it's not about this. It's about financial stability. You know, how do we keep going with less and less money? So that's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is a sense in which we are sustaining something larger than ourselves, the Earth. And so if I could have, yeah, thanks. What is sustainability? So I wanted to suggest that we use a definition that the Harvard Business School has put forth. Sustainability refers to doing business without negatively impacting the environment, community, or society as a whole. Okay? Sustainability refers to doing business without negatively impacting the environment, community, or society as a whole. So another way that organizations and businesses are thinking about is something called the triple bottom line. And so at Harvard, they talk about the triple bottom line in terms of three things. The first is social profit, and we're talking about nonprofits in particular, which are, of course, nonprofits, so they don't make money, but there is a profit, there is a social profit. Second is building community, so it isn't just about your organization, but your impact in the community, and the good that you're doing there. And finally, it's about the planet. It's preserving the planet, understanding that the Earth is ours to steward, that the Earth is something that we have been given a trust to take care of. So that's all these together make up the triple bottom line. That's the sustainability that we're talking about. So on the next slide, what we want to stress is that sustainability is not really something that's new. I mean, certainly those of us who've read the Bible know that it's in there, it permeates. I don't have to go through scriptures, but we have one example from Numbers. And then certainly indigenous peoples, First Nations people, ancient cultures, ancient wisdom. I mean, that sense of sustainability has been there. And you know, some of us are a little bit late to that, but we're starting to learn. I used to serve in Hawaii, and they have these sayings that relate to sustainability. These are ancient sayings. For instance, one of them is, rains always follow the forest. Rains always follow the forest. And if you think about that, what that means is the Hawaiians knew that rains tend to fall where the forests are. And so for them, what was important is understanding, you don't cut down all the trees. You don't do clear cutting of the forest, because if you do, you're not going to get any rain. And of course, we have seen that in our own lifetime. So these are kinds of ancient wisdoms, you know, that have been around. Again, not something new. And then finally, UCC General Synod resolutions. If you've been to Synod, you certainly know that we have passed no small number of resolutions that relate to sustainability in so many different ways. Okay, so finally, before we actually get into the SDGs, we want to talk about other kinds of sustainability in terms of whether, this is something that is just passing, or is this something that's going to be here to stay? So Matt, you want to take it from
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Charles, appreciate that. And thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon. So I'm in the middle of an MBA program, and so if we can all just take ourselves maybe out of these seats for a moment and transport ourselves into some business school somewhere, some aspirational place, let's talk about Harvard. By the way, I'm not at the Harvard MBA program. We think about that social profit, building community, and preserving the planet. If you were sitting in a business school, what would they really be talking about? Shareholder profitability, right? First and foremost, that's number one line item, 1A. 1B would be your people. How do we treat our employees right? Hopefully, how do we treat our customers right so that they do more business with us, right? And that increases our profit. And then finally, we think about planet. What are the ways in which we are enriching the spaces that we have so that we don't come under the fire of environmental regulators or others and have to pay fines, which is going to impact our profits. As not-for-profits, we get to think about this totally differently, and actually it's quite freeing, right? Instead of the word shareholder, let's replace that with stakeholders, all right? So let's think about social profit for our stakeholders. That could be shareholders, those folks that maybe have a financial interest in what we do, but that also includes the folks that you serve, the families that are served by your organization, the communities that you serve. When we think about building community, we think about bringing people together in relationship, which is really at the heart of what CHSM does. Frankly, it's at the heart of what all 5 financial ministries do as well. And then when we think about preserving the planet, when we go through as all of the General Synod resolutions and all of the things we look at, climate is just like in bold, bright letters in a lot of what we do. And that's important, and we need to make sure that we know that we're making a positive impact. So when we take those concepts of environmental issues and social issues, that building community, and governance issues, the way in which we interact with one another, we can actually look at that in the ways that we invest our assets. So you can see by the chart here behind me that since 1995 through the year 2020, and this is a report from the U.S. Sustainable and Impact Investing Trends from the U.S. SIF Foundation, as of 2020, in 1995, the total assets that were invested sustainably, exceptionally small number. As of 2020, $16.5 trillion in total assets. Now let's take a minute and break down that 16.5 total trillion. It's a huge number. It's a really big number. 25% of the 16.5 trillion or so that's invested with those ESG, what we'll call ESG, and by the way, that's the blue section, the biggest section there. That comes from retail or individual investors. That's folks that are trying to make a difference through investing in an IRA, a 401k, an investment account. I want you to think about those folks as your donors, right? Those are donors that are going to perhaps make a planned gift to you over time. The other 75% is institutional investors. Those are organizations like yours, like the organizations that we invest for, United Church Funds, that are committed to making an investment and making an impact with the dollars that they are entrusted with. When we look at the bar that's in the middle, sort of that beige bar there, those are folks, let me backtrack. The blue section there is just incorporating various environmental, social, and governance factors into their investment decisions. All right, that's sort of the lowest hanging fruit, if you will. The next phase of that is to actually do corporate engagement, to engage with the corporations of which you own their shares through filing shareholder resolutions, and that's one way to change corporate behavior over time. Something that we at United Church Funds care deeply about. That total is about $2 trillion in total investments. Of that $2 trillion, $1.7 trillion comes from institutional investors like us. So there are a very few amount of your donors that have the ability to impact corporate behavior through shareholder resolutions. And then finally, folks that are doing both, that's about $1.5 trillion. That's the smallest sleeve that you say there. And that is mostly institutional investors. Those folks with the ability to do both the ESG factors in the securities that we hold in the portfolio, as well as that corporate engagement piece on a go-forward basis. Now, when we look at that big blue bar there, ESG is a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, but let me break that down for you. For those retail investors, so what your donors are going to care about. So if they ask you a question about how is your endowment managed over time, perhaps they're thinking about giving you a gift. These are the 5 biggest things that come to the mind of retail investors as it relates to ESG, according to this study. Climate change and carbon, anti-corruption, board issues, so that would be for example, diversity, equity, inclusion on your board, sustainability of natural resources, and executive compensation. What did we say that Mike's getting on his way out? What was it, platinum parachute? Did I hear that this morning? That's right, yeah. When we think about that from an institutional investor's perspective, we think about those categories. What organizations like United Church Funds are have been most engaged with, of course, climate, but also conflict risk. And we see that it's certainly framed out very clearly on everything that we're watching on the news today. Tobacco and other health issues, board issues, again, board and governance issues, and sustainability as a smaller piece of that. So there is some overlap there between what institutional investors are certainly caring about and what our donors potentially should be caring about. And as stewards of the assets of which we're entrusted, we have to be aware of those trends and make sure that we are hopefully not just following the trends, but actually leading the trends forward so that we can stay on the right side of all of those issues. So as you can imagine, when you go from like $2 trillion in total assets that are invested with ESG principles to $16.5 trillion, the tools in the toolbox for folks like United Church Funds and other folks, and frankly for all of your organizations, increase dramatically. So there are 5 tools that you see behind me here, and 5 tools that we use at United Church Funds. The first is manager selection. Who are we going to do business with, and who's going to help us with the security selection in our portfolio to focus on those 5 or 6 core priorities of our donors and institutions. We see, of course, impact first ventures. We heard about an impact first venture today in the annual meeting. Molo Village is an impact first venture, right? I heard the speaker say, I think that there was something in the neighborhood of $85 million on the way out of the, something like that?
Yeah.
And Molo Village is going to turn that around, and we're going to bring $25 million back into an underserved community. That's an impact first venture. Those are the things that we need to be considering and thinking about. I think about Darlene, I see you sitting here, so I'll use you as an example. I think about the ways in which Unleashing Potential is doing good work in the St. Louis community with kids that may not have opportunity unless you provided it. Those are impact first ventures. So it doesn't have to be necessarily how we're making an investment, how we're buying a bond or buying a stock. It could be the ways in which we're deploying capital to make an impact, right? Is everybody with me there? Corporate engagement. Folks like United Church Funds, this is what Charles and I get excited about, and our Director of Responsible Investing, Matthew Illian. We actually get to directly engage with corporations on the issues that are affecting us and our community to make our community a better place. I would encourage you to go to our website and look at some of the things that we're doing. I'm not going to list them out for the purposes of time today, but we have at any given time dozens and dozens of different corporate engagements and shareholder resolutions that we are helping to lead or we are leading with an ecumenical group of other investors. Proxy voting is another way, so we have the opportunity, because we're an owner of those shares, to vote certain ways about who's on the board of directors and what that makeup looks like. We at United Church Funds, we hope that you believe like we do that diverse boards make up great corporations, certainly would make corporations better and be more reflective of the folks that work for them and the folks that are doing business with those corporations. And so that would be one example of a way that we can impact and change with proxy voting. And then finally, I think the last tool in the toolbox for all of us is divestment. That means that all of the other things that we've been trying to do, whether it's making an impact or doing a shareholder resolution, it's just not going to work for that particular industry. And so what we're going to elect to do is to take our dollars somewhere else and go make a competitive return. And so divestment is one of those tools, and it is important. We have a number of screens across our portfolio, and other institutional investors that we do a lot of engagement with, have other screens as well. And so you'll see that various mutual funds that you have access to maybe in your own portfolio may have a set of screens. What I would encourage you to do with the divestment piece is to make sure that the screens, if you say, man, this is a ESG mutual fund, that's great. Make sure you dig in a little bit. Look at that prospectus and find out what those screens actually are. And make sure that they actually are in line with either your organization's goals, or if it's your own personal portfolio, is it in line with your own personal goals? You'll often find that perhaps there isn't as much overlap as you may think. One other way, most of that deals with, owning the shares of company, owning stock, right? One of the other growing ways that we can make an impact with investment portfolios as it relates to sustainability is through fixed income investments. This is sort of a new way to do it, right? So we heard from CBLF's impact venture with Molo. That's a little bit like a debt first place, right? So that's a sort of a debt impact investment. We can also make those in public markets. 42% of the total fixed income exposure at United Church Funds, approximately, it's about $84 million that we have invested, is generating a positive sustainable impact. Those are through green and sustainable bonds, through social bonds, and through bonds that were related to the pandemic to help bring tests and equipment and medicines to folks that have been impacted. Now, of course, you'll notice that 25 plus 10 plus, I am in an MBA class, does not equal 42. And what got left off of this slide, as I'm just seeing, is that there's another little sleeve there that is a variety of different other categories. Those are the main three categories. So I know I'm on camera here. I want to make sure that any professor that sees me doing this knows that I can do the basic math.
Do you have arithmetic in your course?
Yeah, that was the first class out of the gate, luckily for me. We recently had the largest gathering on climate since Paris, and that was COP 26, right? That was in Glasgow. It set out a couple of new different environmental sort of goals, if you will. And certainly we need to think about, the reason we have this slide in here, I think, is to make sure that we're thinking about how our portfolios broadly, we think about the 75 or so organizations that are affiliated with CHSHSM, and you think about all the endowments that are managed by a variety of folks, including UCF, think about how those dollars are impacting the climate. And I think if we are being honest with ourselves, we would have to say that if we're not making an impact on climate, what impact are we really making, sort of first and foremost? And so we want to make sure that all of the dollars that we're thinking about and that we're stewarding along to make this sustainability impacts are making a difference on climate. Here's some challenges, and I'm gonna ask Charles to come back up here and handle a couple of these challenges. I have a couple to add, but I would encourage you to think also, as Charles is going through this list, about a couple of the challenges that may face us as we seek that sustainability. Charles?
Thanks, yeah. So you notice that the goals that they're talking about, 2030, 2050, these are long-term goals. This will not happen overnight. You just don't flip a switch and suddenly through sustainability, everything gets solved here. But, they've identified sort of some of the issues we're going to have to face, like fossil fuels. To phase out fossil fuels, go to clean energy like solar, wind, hydrogen, and so on, there probably is going to need to be a transition kind of fuel, and so they're saying nuclear. So nuclear is coming back. Well, nuclear, of course, has waste, and we note that. Half-life of uranium and plutonium especially. I mean, we're talking thousands, tens of thousands of years. But it's not just that. Look at what happened in Ukraine. Look at the Russian invasion. Why would they want Chernobyl? But, they attacked Chernobyl. Or think about the active nuclear plant that they actually, took control of. Obviously to control the energy, but that's the risk. So, the transition's not going to be easy when you think about things like that. Another one, electric vehicles. I want an electric vehicle. I don't have one currently, but I know I will at some point. But electric vehicles at this point, they actually emit 2 times the carbon of the usual internal combustion engine of conventional vehicles. And why is that? Well, in the production of batteries, lithium mining, for example, those are intensive, carbon-intensive processes. So right out the gate, they are twice the emitter of internal combustion engines. It's only over time as you keep that car, you don't use the fossil fuel that you are actually contributing. So, you know, again, some of the transition kinds of things that we have to deal with. Matt, you want to take these others?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we just have a few others, and I think the couple of other points here relate to sort of a just transition, right? So as we move to you know, from a fossil fuel burning society to a society that looks and envisions a more clean future, what does that mean for the workers that work in fossil fuels? Certainly. I live in Southern Illinois, which is a coal mining area. Coal miners in Southern Illinois make a really good living, you know, per capita. They also do something that's really harmful to the planet generally for a living. And so we want to think about how a transition to a clean energy society will impact not only those industries, but those families. And I think that's certainly a point that we can make. A couple of other challenges that are just sort of right in front of us that we're thinking about all the time. Inflation, of course, we're all sort of feeling that, but the idea that it is getting more and more expensive, at least in the shorter term, to make this transition, right? It's actually a little cheaper to use these infrastructures that we already have in place. And the second would be supply chain. As much as Charles would like to buy a clean vehicle, they have so much technology, and that technology is slow and a little bit slow in coming and being able to put into an end product. And so those are just two other challenges that I would add that we certainly have today. So with that being said, Peggy and Patrick, I'm actually going to ask for your help. We have a little bit of a worksheet here, if I could. Could we pass these out? Sure. Yeah, thanks. And you won't need all of them. There you go. Thank you. Yep.
I'll raise you.
So this is not due. This is not something that's due at the end of class, ladies and gentlemen. But we've talked about sustainability and we've talked about the importance of it. The United Nations came out with, in 2015, came out with these UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. There's 17 of them. We realized in putting together a PowerPoint presentation that this was going to be really hard to read on the screen, so we wanted to give you a worksheet. And second of all, we actually wanted you to think about each one of these 17 sustainable development goals as it relates to how they intertwine with one another. If you'll remember back to that quote that was up on the screen before from Chief Seattle, it says, "Whatever you do to the web, you do to yourself." That was part of that. That was part of that quote there. And so, when we think about these lofty goals that were set forward, in 2015 for some sort of reachable or attainment in 2030, and we look at these 17, what do we see there? Poverty, hunger, health and well-being, community education, etc. And so the reason we gave you this quick worksheet and the way that it looks the way it does is that is to draw a correlation between sort of those four categories that we have set forward on there as well: environmental, social, economic, and that governmental piece. So when we think about hunger, could you check the box underneath whether end hunger or no poverty has an environmental factor associated with it? I would argue it does. Social, of course. Economic, of course. Governmental, of course. You can go across many of those 17 and think about the ways in which they intersect with one another. What that actually allows us to do is to think about and start to prioritize the way that we can be sustainable within our own organization, what we do specifically, and then where the most boxes are checked across this chart. So as we think about that, and we think about implementation of best practices, these are clearly meant to overlap. And what we would encourage every organization to do is to think about these sustainable development, these 17 very broad things. Think about where you are today. What impacts are you able to make with your operations, with your investments, with the other assets that with real estate, for example, with which you've been entrusted? Where are you now, and how can we prioritize to make progress as we move forward? Notice that the United Nations in 2015 did not come out with 17 sustainable development goals and say by 2017 we're going to have this linked. They gave themselves a 15-year window, and I would argue that that's still a really aggressive timeline, right, to start to make impacts, but it's a start. And so as you think about these 17 different arenas, and think about ways in which you can prioritize how your operation could impact this. When I think about CHHSM organizations, I don't know necessarily that 14 life below water is going to be one that's probably in anyone's top 5 in this room. But I do think about how we can make a difference in quality education, in sustainable cities and communities, in responsible consumption and production, and of course poverty and hunger and gender equality and other issues that I know your organizations care about. Just some implementation ideas. I'm not going to go through these verbatim, and then I'm going to turn this back over to Charles for a couple of tips that he found from a chief sustainability officer. A lot of these things are not rocket science, as you can tell, but I think doing business locally is one that we can all seek to do, which is actually really important to be able to empower communities. So when your board's in town and it's time to do a dinner or a lunch, let's find a local business. Let's find a business where your few $100 for dinner or a lunch could really make a difference in the way that they're able to retain employees. That's making an impact. That's actually helping with a sustainable development goal. When you think about the ways in which you're going to use your largest assets, for most of you, that's real estate and your investment portfolio. How are we going to do that in a way that at least gets us from point A to point B on sustainability, even over the short term, and then hopefully A to Z over the long term? So you can see some ideas up there. Any other ideas? You can read those. Any other things that come to mind? Yeah.
How do you purchase carbon offset? Is there a avenue to do that?
You know, I would have to be fair, I don't know,
You
carbon
can do it
offsets.
online.
Yeah, there's a few websites where you can
Yeah.
actually do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was just gonna highlight that there are currently like quite a few incentives, depending on where you are, to make some of these changes.
Sure.
Like for example, in the state of Illinois, like it's a no-brainer to go solar on your home. Like I don't know about business incentives, but personal incentives, like the state pays almost 50% of your system.
Yeah, through tax rebates and other things, absolutely. Diane? Yeah.
At RHF, we do an analysis of our energy usage and plan annually for energy reducing, products like light bulbs. And
Sure. Absolutely. Sort of put a plan in place to be able to sort of make you more efficient over time. Absolutely. Yeah, Peggy.
I would say in addition and related to reducing the use of plastic, it's just reducing the use of disposables in general.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know it takes more water to clean things, so I don't know what the offset is, but
Right.
we throw away a lot.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Others?
Recycling, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've heard a phrase recently that the most environmentally friendly item is the one you don't buy. So I think it's
Yeah,
also just,
all right. I like that.
Consumerism, more expensive.
like, just encouraging folks to not acquire things.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we certainly live in a consumption society, right?
Yeah.
Consumer spending drives 70-ish% of gross domestic product in the U.S. For a reason, right? We definitely consume a lot. But the idea that we can be responsible about what we consume, certainly, and the ways in which we consume them, absolutely can make a difference over time. Yeah. Excellent. One last point, and then we'll get to that. We'll get to that slide. With your investments, the long story short of this slide, and probably the question I get asked most by clients when we come to them and we talk about the ways in which we invest money in a sustainable and socially responsible way, they're like, well, I mean, it's really expensive, right? Or you can't generate a rate of return that is comparable, right? The answer is no. That is not right. That's actually incorrect. In fact, our Beyond Fossil Fuels Fund and Beyond Fossil Fuels Balanced Fund were some of the top performers just last year, and over the last 5 years have been some of the top performers in their, not just in our fund category, but in their peer groups. Those are funds that divest almost 100%, in fact, basically 100%, from all fossil fuel related exploration or production. So the idea that we could be making an impact across all of our other screens, we can do the shareholder resolutions, we can do the corporate advocacy, and we can have this really unique screen that takes fossil fuels out of a portfolio, and it's still a top performer, actually speaks to the idea that being a sustainable investor over the long period can certainly be beneficial to a portfolio's bottom line, which is important, which should be important to all of us as good stewards and fiduciaries. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Charles, and then we'll look forward to some Q&A.
Yeah, I think that you can tell we're really passionate about this. This isn't just something that we add on to the layer of investment management that we do, but it really is integrated into everything we do and believe in. And Matt really exemplifies that, and I think he's described pretty well how we understand this works. It all comes together, and the investment choices that we make have a direct impact on the ways in which we understand our stewardship of the creation. So not too long ago, I was online just doing one of these online courses, and one was offered by the Chief Sustainability Officer at Microsoft. It was actually a good one, and if you're interested, I can find the link. By the way, does anybody have a Chief Sustainability Officer or a CSO in your organizations? You got to be a Microsoft, I think, to be able to afford something like that, right? Okay. But I thought these were really good, and so I'm going to just read through each one, and I think these are really just good practical things. Align sustainability with the core competencies of your organization. That's great, right? Align sustainability with the core competencies of your organization. What do you do well? What is it that you care about? And then make sure that everything you do in terms of sustainability aligns with that. If it doesn't, it's just an extra layer. It's not something that you're going to be able to really treat as a priority. You won't actually do anything about it. The second thing here is embed sustainability into your organizational vision or goals. And this one is important because you want to make it something that is as visible as your vision statement, and you have goals that accomplish that for obvious reasons. I'll just leave it there. Third one, in balancing sustainability and operations, be clear about the vision. Unrealistic or lofty goals are unsustainable. If it's not something you can achieve, you won't. So make it something that makes sense and something that in fact you can achieve. Set clear goals. And then finally, all change starts at the individual level. It has to be something that we each believe in, something we care about, something that means something to me personally. And if all of us believe the same thing, then together we'll be able to accomplish that goal. There are actually a whole bunch of other tips, and again, if you're interested, I can send you to that link, but I thought these were 4 in particular that were very helpful for us as we think about starting or perhaps continuing our efforts at sustainability. By the way, we will make these slides available. I think they're going to be on the CHSHSM website after the conference. So I think with this, what we want to do really is just kind of to leave it open. We don't have to go to the end, but there were those questions in the beginning that were discussion starters. You can go back to those and sort of see where we are, what sort of things are on our mind as we think about sustainability, and perhaps you have your own kind of tips. You might not have a CSO, but you probably have your own tips for us. So, yeah. Yeah.
This might be a question you already answered and I just missed it. Are these more sustainable investments available for individual investors or corporate, or just corporate investment?
So both, yeah, both. There are retail mutual funds and ETFs, exchange traded funds, that implement aspects of sustainable development goals. I think what you'd find in the retail market most often are mutual funds and ETFs that focus on specific aspects of what this does, right? So environmental issues specifically, social issues specifically, etc. But again, and I'll reiterate this, as the total assets, managed with these ESG factors goes up, there are more and more and more vehicles that could be available to retail investors specifically. Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, let's ask this third question.
Yeah, sure. So this actually is an interesting one for us. So on the government and licensing front, if you will, for your organizations, I'm sure in some states there are regulations and things that sort of that dictate how you do business. Is sustainability reporting a part of any of those government regulations necessarily at this point, or do you see it come? I see one nodding head. So go ahead. Yeah.
One is for the nursing homes, in terms of the licensing requirements, there's sustainability requirements requirements financially.
Mhm. So in other words, let me clarify that. So if you do not meet sustainability metrics, there's fines and fees, or there's,
So you proclaim that, and
Okay.
then the licensing agency
sure.
works with you to determine if you receive a license.
Interesting.
Financial sustainability.
Financial sustainability, sure, sure. Patrick, not to put you on the spot, but did you run into any environmental issues or anything as you relate to either the Molo Village project or other projects that you've been associated with? And what part does environmental sustainability play in some of the corporate development that you do?
Yeah, so, not in terms of the meeting, we didn't really set environmental goals for that project. So many other goals to try to achieve.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But we did, in the process, we did have to deal with some potential environmental issues with the construction, different kinds of that. One thing I would say is that, sustainability, and especially the SDGs, are not as well known in the United States as other parts of the world.
Sure.
But for folks who seek philanthropic gifts from especially the major foundations who have a global footprint, they're very much in tune with SDGs. And it would behoove us, if you look at funding from those organizations, to try to get up to speed on what they're looking at and what they like. I mean, it's very, in Europe, in Africa and Asia, the corporate community is much more engaged in here. It's more widely embraced. So, but there's something. So that's an important factor.
Yeah. In fact, Europe is in the lead on this. There's no question
Yeah.
about that. They're the ones developing or probably driving the standards, toward ESG. And in fact, COP26 is notable because out of that came quite a clear consensus toward a standard that will probably be implemented worldwide. But we have quite a ways to go, and so people are asking, well, what are the standards? What are kinds of the measurables that we need to keep in mind? And the truth is that there's nothing out there yet, and certainly in the U.S. there's no regulation. So it's difficult also for organizations who are trying to figure all this out. And when you take the SDGs, for example, I mean, you saw that there are no clear guidelines. And by the way, if you go to the SDG website, I think it's sdgs.un.org, sdgs.un.org. You go there, and there's nothing really concrete. And the idea behind these SDGs, if you really dig down deep, it isn't so much about following a prescription of recommendations as it is really suggestions for ways in which you can engage the topic. So if you have a board and want to do some generative discussion, or if you want to bring, say, management or staff together, this could actually be a good way to think about, or to do some sort of employee or board engagement, to think about ways in which your organization might accomplish some of the SDG goals. But there's nothing that's required. There are no standards, again, that are set. But Patrick's absolutely right. I mean, in the rest of the world, they're farther ahead. We were set back. There's no question. In 2015, we thought with Paris, wow, we were on our way, and then there was an election, and we were set back. And COP26, that's a whole different, it's almost like we got back to where we were in terms of U.S. involvement and the interest. And that's why we think sustainability is here to stay, unless there's another election and something incredible happens. But this is an evolving field, and my sense is we want to be ahead of this rather than to wait, because if we wait, it's already too late in terms of sustainability.
So to add to what Patrick said, my experience is that it's not just national foundations, community foundations are asking, what are you doing around sustainability? And it's like you said, Charles, it's not prescriptive. It's just how are you addressing or tackling or thinking about this issue?
The website also, and you're right, Charles, about the lack of, sort of a process or way. When you go to this SDG website, each SDG has even another level of clarity around how do you go after that goal. And there's a cottage industry of consultants out there that'll help you figure out how to do it. So, I mean, there's a lot going on in that space.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say we probably could have done a workshop on any number of the goals specifically. Yeah, absolutely. Susan, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say that not only are organizations looking to ask other organizations they want to do investments with, what are they doing, but they also look at themselves. I'm doing some work around sustainability of faith-based organizations, and they are also incorporating the SDGs into their life, as well as looking for other organizations who they might invest in for financial sustainability to follow the same sequence. And so, to answer your question, Charles, it's here to stay because it's being more and more studied and more utilized as more faith-based CDCs and organizations are developing and growing and more coming into existence. That's really where the groundbreaking work is right now, and they're incorporating that from their beginnings. And so I think it's just going to go, even more,
Well,
and the demands will become higher.
Absolutely. And to the points that were made about, the idea that sustainability is becoming a part of, various requests for funding, right? If your board is engaged, if you can really show board engagement, not just, yeah, we know where the website is, but it actually maybe start the process of doing some of the work. Think about how far ahead you'll be against other folks that are also competing for those same dollars. So it can actually put you in the driver's seat. Yeah. Peggy, yes, please.
Well, I'm thinking about borrowing from other industries, and a few years ago we saw hotels beginning to leave little placards on our beds that said if you don't have to change your bed every day, you're going to save so much water and so much soap and all this. So I think that ties into working with people at the individual level. If we can educate our constituents, there are a million little things we can all do. Even if we can't retrofit a big, building, make it LEED certified or those things, we can do the little things, or at least educate upon them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Makes me think, we did a tailgate with our family sometime last fall, and I made hot chocolate, took that along for the kids, put them in styrofoam cups with plastic lids, and it was the grandkids that said, we don't need these lids. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So just educating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so my comment is a little bit like the styrofoam cup stories leads right into what I was gonna say, and I'm gonna generalize here, but I would say people my age have a deep existential dread about the future of the planet.
Yes.
And so drawing on the last question of how important is this to your current and future donors, I don't necessarily think that donors that you have already locked in are gonna go away if you're not doing this. But I can tell you that when I see that an organization is focusing on doing their work in a way that's sustainable for the environment, I'm more likely to become a donor.
Sure.
Because frankly, I'm terrified.
And we do see it with current donors. Absolutely. I mean, they do ask questions of the churches of which we work with and institutions, about what you're doing around your investments. It is important, and there's no doubt.
And if you want to draw young investors, that's going to get their attention.
Yeah. Absolutely. Diane, I see a hand. And then Essence, I see you too.
Our executive leadership provides a letter to every resident about ways that we can improve in terms of water management, how they themselves can preserve the building and our utility usage.
Especially for the agencies that are so real estate intensive, right? I mean, I think that's certainly a piece. Essence, I want to make sure that, I saw your hand, I want to make sure that we hear you.
Yeah, I would say also a small piece about what I see happening a lot amongst my peers that are in my age group. When we have the conversation about sustainability, making sure that we're including and acknowledging Indigenous and Aboriginal folks who have always been sustainable, who have always been culturally very aware of what's happening with the environment. And I think sometimes our conversation around sustainability stigmatizes people or stigmatizes who's on what land doing what without acknowledging that people who were presently here, historically here, were taking care of the land and already doing things that were good for this planet that we appreciate. And I know personally, particularly with my divinity school friends, it's cool to see the sustainability piece, but it's honorable and just to see a piece that acknowledges the folks who are already living this type of sustainable life for generations.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes?
When we talk about sustainable practices for organizations, I'm struck though by the fact that the pandemic set us back and wondering if there might be new guidelines coming out or help, such as we can't necessarily serve things in big pots that we wash anymore. You know, we have to serve individual, so much more paper and individual servings, and plastic has come back in order to keep people from infection. And do we see any help with that, of how to get out of that?
Your point's well taken, and I would also say that the alternate is true, is that my Zoom calls are much less, much more carbon neutral than my flights around the country before the pandemic. And also, to be fair, a lot easier on our organizational budget, right? And we can use those monies to make different impacts. So, but no, your point's well taken, and totally agree. I think about when my daughter goes to school, and it's, I mean, the amount, I mean, there's more trash today than there was 3 years from now. Absolutely. Just in masks alone, it seems like, around the school. Yeah. Others before we? Please, Mike.
Be real transparent. When I look at this, is very helpful. When I look at this, I think, man, we're doing an awful job with this in my agency. You know, we're not doing these things and are not really conscious of this. So this raises the conscious level, which I think is really important. I will though go back and tell my staff that we're going to have the kids shower just once a week now. Well, you know, Mike, I live just outside of St. Louis. I'm happy to come have lunch for you, but it's going to be on that day where
Shower day, yeah.
Well, there are like single-use disposable, like compostable items. Like they don't have to be made of the thing that's the worst for the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank everyone for the time today. I want to thank my colleague Charles for co-presenting, and I want to thank all of you for not only your time, but your questions and your engagement. As Charles said, we're passionate about this at United Church Funds, and sustainability means a lot of different things to different folks. This is one way that we can examine sustainability in our organizations. We hope that it just kind of gets the ball rolling as it relates to the conversations and discussions in your organization. And as you have questions beyond today or tomorrow, Charles and I, of course, our doors and email inboxes are always open to you all for further questions. So with that, I thank you very much. All right.
So I want to echo the applause here and just say thank you so much. You all are such a magnificent partner to us, and we really appreciate it. I think the thing you do best, besides obviously managing investments, etc., you make us think beyond today's operations. We're overwhelmed with getting through COVID and everything else that's going on, but you continue to push us to think outside the immediate crises. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it.